Hello, it's time for another function of the week, and this week the function is weave. So this is an actual weave that I made in a textile center in Austria, in Haslach. And these the weave you see I actually designed with Tidal, so I've got the code somewhere. I wrote a paper about it or something, but I used Tidal to just create patterns of ups and downs, and you can see that it's made some interesting patterns. The thing about weave though is that it's got two directions. Weaving is a particular structure that is different from knitting or braiding. In weaving, you have a warp, which is under tension, goes in this direction, and you have a weft, which goes up and down the warp threads to create the structure. And the image you see is a result of the patterns of the warp and weft and how they interact in these different structures. But the function weave is kind of influenced by this in that it has two kind of patterns which interact with each other. It's not exactly a weave. I wrote this weave function before I ever actually did any weaving, so but there's an interesting relation there. Maybe we'll talk about that as we go along. Right. So here is the worksheet. There's quite a lot here for one function. It's quite a curious function, but let's see if we can work out what's going on. I seem to have frozen. There. Am I moving in now? Yes. I don't know what happened there. Okay. Happens to me sometimes. So let's start title.
3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2.
I wonder if the Google automatic subtitling will pick up those numbers. Let's see later on. So that's just the simple pattern, just goes 0, 1, 2, 3, as you heard. Let's see what happens when we plug that into this weave function. Let's have a listen.
1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1 2 3 0 1.
So you can hear that it is slowly panning from one ear to the next if both your ears work. Or if you have a stereo system, some people might have mono. I remember running a headphone festival once, and there was a guy at Ardem who came, and he made everyone switch off one of their headphones because he only had hearing in one ear. And so we all listened to music the way he did, and it's quite nice. But let's get back to the topic, which is weave. So let's see what's happening. You could hear that it was panning across, and that was following this pattern. So this would actually be the same as if you'd just done this. So pan, slow 4, saw. Saw is just a linear movement from 0 to 1. Which means that it will pan linearly from one speaker to the next, and when it gets to the other one, it'll just switch immediately back to this one, because it goes straight back down to 0 again when it gets to 1. So this is actually a nicer way of writing that, I think. So this is not too useful if you only have one pattern in. But it kind of gets you a bit familiar with weave. This 4 here, this number here, is how much to slow this down by. And this is a pattern which this is applied to once it's slowed down. So what happens when you have two patterns in here? So this time I've replaced numbers with alphabet for the second pattern, so it'll sound
B C D A B C D A B C D.
So it's just going A, B, C, D. So we should hear numbers and the alphabet at the same time. Let's have a listen.
C D A B C D A B C D A B C D A B C D A B C D A B C.
So you can hear maybe that the numbers and the alphabet are just stacked on top of one another. When alphabet is on A, then numbers is on 0. They line up perfectly when there's just two of them. But you might have also heard that they were at different positions along the pan. So when the numbers when the number 0 was in one speaker, the letter A was dead center. So that's because alphabet is offset by 2 cycles. So it's halfway along this slowed down pan, which means that it's continually chasing after the numbers, and the numbers is also chasing after alphabet. They're equidistant from each other along this pan. So let's try something a bit more complicated, which is adding so this is just showing you what how you could do this without the weave. So this is just showing that this is shifted by 2 cycles. Otherwise, it's just using a stack. And it's not the whole pattern that's shifted. It is only the bit for the panning. Okay. So this is a more musical example, I'm calling it. It's got 2 rhythms in instead. So let's hear what that sounds like and decide whether it's music or not. So you can hear, hopefully, that the 2 patterns are chasing after each other. I could change this for a different waveform. Let's put a sine wave. And now maybe you can hear that instead of chasing after each other, they're both following a sine wave, but one's shifted by half, so they kind of cross over each other in the middle before going out again. Change that back to saw. There. So what happens when you add a third one? This starts getting a bit stranger. Let's have a listen. So that's adding a bit of a clap there. And they're spreading out over 4 cycles, but they don't line up perfectly then. So if you spread things out over 3 cycles, it starts getting a bit off kilter. Yeah. In the back of my mind, I'm not completely sure why it's off kilter. If it's like a stack, I'm getting a bit confused about this now. I'll have to have a think. Why are they off kilter? Don't know. But once you get 4 of them in, then it starts feeling regular again. Yeah. Okay. I have to think about that. But that's the 4/4 structure again. And it sounds nice. They're kind of chasing after each other or crossing over from each other in interesting ways. There There you go. Right, so saw gives a smooth linear movement, and you can try these other ones instead. So you could give it a discrete pattern with mini notation, where it's shifting in steps rather than smoothly, or you could try instead using crush or vowel, or whatever you liked. Let's try crush. So bit crushing, let's try a range from 4 to 8 CL. You can hear different parts getting bit crushed, going in and out. It's pretty fun. Okay. It also works for global effects. So here I've got some reverb on, so they're going they're going along this reverb pattern. So I'm using both room and size, the two parameters of reverb, and putting saw on both, so it will get really reverberant when it gets at the top. But I've had to put each one on a different orbit because reverb is a global effect, but you can give each pattern its own reverb unit by putting them on different orbits like this. Awesome. Okay, so up to now we've been playing with sort of sound patterns and some N patterns here in this bit, which we might call the weft, and we could call this the warp, going in the other direction maybe, I don't know, that's the metaphor anyway, and we've been putting effects in here. But it doesn't have to be that way around actually. You can have put a note pattern here, and put an effect pattern here. So what happens? So the mechanism is the same, but it's just a bit strange. It's kind of turned into a kind of, well, it's slowed this down by 8 cycles, and this is now stepping up along it. And if you add more patterns to that, I've got 2 vowels, a squiz, and a room effect here. So that's interesting. Each of these effect patterns is now at a different point along the effect pattern. Each of these effect patterns is now at a different point along this sort of tune. So on its own, this would just be going up and down, because I've got an every 2 rev there. Oh, I've also got something. Yeah. So that's just going up and down, but that simple scale, using this pentatonic Richardson scale, is slowed down over 8 cycles, and then these will then be spaced out by 2 cycles along there. So let's listen. Nice. So what happens now if we have 3? again, it's off kilter. I think I've worked out why actually. It's spacing out 3 patterns along 8 cycles, and so that will not delete. That won't be divided equally into whole numbers. So this will be a third of the way in of 8 cycles. So it'll be whatever. Yeah, 3/8. I don't know what that is in decimal number, but yeah, it won't be an equal division of the 8 cycles, so that's why it's off kilter. Good, I got there in the end. I hope that makes sense. One last thing, this gets even stranger, but there's another function which is related, if I can spell that right, called weave with. And it's exactly the same as weave, but instead of control patterns here, you can put functions. So you could put a reverse here, or you could put some fast to, or slowing it down, or whatever. What you'd normally do is just put in a control pattern, but with something like this. So here I'm saying I've put the bar on the right hand side of the plus, which means that the structure is coming from this pattern, not this one, because this is really slowed down and not detailed. So I generally want to take the structure from the control pattern that is in this bit, because it's not been slowed down. But experiment with the other way around if you like. So let's try that. So you can hear there's a high-pitched version which is going up and down that scale faster than the other ones, and that's because there's a hurry 4 here. It's not, it's only, I think it's probably only playing one sound every other cycle. But I could change that by putting a struct here as well. I've not tried this before, but I think it's going to work. Let's see. Yeah. Lots of fun to be had there, I think. Yeah, so have fun with that. That's weave. There's also some other textile metaphors like so, and I think another one. Yeah, have to dig them out, and maybe they can be future functions of the week. And this is the point where I should go into the function of the week jingle, but I still don't have one. If anyone has the urge to compose some jingles, then we need a function of the week one. But never mind. So I'll just have to sing then. So function of the week. Bye.